Well, welcome everyone to our professionals talk tonight. The theme is transport. We've got 3 urban planners, and a research student. You're doing urban planning, I'm assuming, sort of?
Yes, I am a planner, but I'm doing PhD in human government.
Cool. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for coming tonight, guys, and speaking with us. I'll start off with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered today, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and their elders past, present, and emerging. I'll introduce our 3 speakers. Up first, we've got Haleen Singh. She is currently a graduate planning advisor at the Port of Brisbane, and she'll be talking about Port of Brisbane's land use planning over time. And then we'll have Ben Bragagnolo, is that correct? Okay, sorry, I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask you beforehand. Who works as a planner at Brisbane City Council, and he'll be talking about walkable cities. And then up last we have Gazem Azdhari. I had it and I lost it. Who is doing his PhD at UQ on the implications of working from home on urban planning, the future of urban planning.
Thank you. As was mentioned, my name's Ben Bragagnolo, and I'm an urban planner at Brisbane City Council. I'm here to talk about walkable cities, not on behalf of council though, just to stipulate, just because I just have a passion or a love maybe for walkable cities, as I hope we all do. But before I get into all that, I also would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples as the enduring custodians of the land on which we are all meeting tonight, and pay my respect to the elders, those who have passed into the dreaming, those here today and those of tomorrow. May we continue to peacefully walk together in gratitude, respect and kindness in caring for our country and one another. Sweet, we're on a roll. So by way of background, I work in the legacy and games planning team at Brisbane City Council, and have been lucky enough to work on some pretty cool stuff spanning the gamut of urban planning. Be it community engagement, sport and rec, venue design, development assessment, city plan policy, or Olympic and Paralympic legacy outcomes, which is more of what I focus on at the moment. I really love planning's intersection with urban design and placemaking, and find really significant value in the impact planning can have on people. I have a particular love for community engagement, as that's where we as planners can come together with people and get to the bottom of all those juicy issues affecting communities, one of which I'll talk about tonight. Cool. So what are walkable cities? I'm hoping we all have some idea, but firstly, I just want to also set the bar for this presentation and arguably all discussions around walkability, and say that the term walkability covers all forms of mobility and active transport. So meaning that a walkable city is one where everyone, no matter their ability, can get from point A to point B safely and comfortably. So here's a really short list and not exhaustive list as well of factors that can make up a walkable city. So things like an integrated land use mix, the implementation of CEPTED principles, that is crime prevention through environmental design, and traffic calming measures. So like I said, just try to think about things that would make your journey easier when walking from A to B. So what is the history behind walkable cities? I'm assuming we are all geographers in the room in one form or another. So I'll also assume we know that cities haven't always been clogged up by cars and motorways, but that all happened after the Industrial Revolution. So a roaring engine of change, innovation and transformation, before which we walked everywhere. The butcher, the grocer, the blacksmith, the pub, as I said there, what a life. But think of suburbs like Paddington, West End and New Farm, where you can, where cafes and stores line every corner, simply because back then people didn't want to walk halfway across the city just to buy a loaf of bread. But cars being all the rage has lasted a really long time, so much so that they're embedded in our culture and have shaped the fabric of our cities. They're a way of life, they're a hobby, they're freedom from the parents. But because of how we've let them shape us, they're also a necessity for many people. People who don't live or work near PT, people who live in the country or the regions, and people who don't necessarily subscribe to the benefits of public transport and choose to drive. But just because we've gotten to this point doesn't mean we can't move beyond it. So I guess a point I wanted to raise as well to get some thought going was a stat that I found. So what does it say about our relationship with cars that over 50% of some cities is dedicated to roads, and that the average family in Australia needs 1.8 cars to function? More importantly, I guess, what does that say about our relationship with ourselves? It would be unrealistic for me to stand up here and expect everyone to turn in their keys, but I guess we absolutely need to strike a better balance between cars and people in our cities. So I've told you what a walkable city is and how we've gotten to where we are, but I guess the question remains, why should we make our cities more walkable? Well, my first point there is walking is free, so it's a far more equitable solution, but it's as simple as that. If you think about it, if you want to drive and own your own car, you need to pay for lessons, you need to pay for a license, you need to pay for registration, you need to pay for a car, and you need to pay to insure that car. It's a lot of money, and it's not cheap. So even alternatives like ride sharing and public transport can cost money, but not walking. If done safe and comfortable, it's an option for everyone. And I don't stand here, as a side note, attempting to discount public transport as an alternative, an ideal alternative to driving, but rather that I guess creating walkable environments is a solution that can benefit everyone, not just those who can afford a public transport fare or a car. So not only is it free, but it costs the environment nothing. If we target walkability as a priority, it can lead to a reduced heat island effect. It can lower traffic-produced CO2 emissions, and it can result in more planting and vegetation, therefore resulting in increased biodiversity and urban habitat, something that we are rapidly losing. Walking also gets the tick of approval from the GP. So studies show, and this may come as a surprise to some of you, that walking more and sitting less can actually be positive for your health. And not only is it a great idea for your physical health, but it can also lead to increased social interaction and mental well-being. Another point there is economic data has revealed that increased foot traffic on our streets has a direct correlation with higher spending in retail and hospitality outlets. So it contributes to a city's economy and growth. So if we look at Queen Street Mall, for example, it's known as the most successful pedestrian mall in Australia, and it says goodbye to cars 430 metres in the middle of our CBD. And my last point there, last but certainly not least, is safety. So I guess places that are more walkable actually tend to be safer. This goes back to some of those points I made earlier around a street that is more activated with multiple uses, lit up at nighttime, employing strong principles from the Crime Prevention through Environmental Design Handbook is always going to be safer than the dark dead-end laneway next to the Met. If walkable cities, I'm hoping you're thinking, if they're so good, why don't we have more of them? It is the golden question, but also it's a really easy one to answer. A few reasons. So walkability initiatives require strong long-term commitment across all levels of government and strong collaboration between levels of government. That's one that some people don't always think of, but the collaboration is key. Further to this, they require bold and forward-thinking leadership. Another factor there is the consideration of the existing context. So when we want to make our cities more walkable, it often requires retrofitting an extensive network of roads, pathways, parks, and more. And I guess while this needs to happen, the cost is often considered to outweigh the benefit. Cost also factors into my next point, which should resonate with everyone, which is geography. The scope and topography of cities can often make walkability a really, really tough thing to achieve. So if you think of Brisbane, we've got a lot of hills, valleys, floodplains, rivers, creeks, and cliffs, and these are not necessarily conducive to walkable environments. The last one I've mentioned there is community sentiment. Just as some people aren't quite as obsessed as I am as street trees, some people also don't share my love of walkability. So not everyone actually wants to walk everywhere, and not everyone subscribes to the benefits of, I guess, making our cities more walkable, or more importantly, sometimes the money that it can take to achieve this. It is a sad reality, but it's a true one. So how do we overcome these barriers is another golden question. Just like most challenges in life, there's no silver bullet, but rather a list of plenty of different things that we can do to help pave the way. First things first, we've really got to make sure communities understand the benefits of walkability. So to do this, we need to make the concept relatable. So what's in it for Mark, who runs the post office, or Sharon, who works at the Royal Brisbane? Why should they subscribe to this initiative? Secondly, politicians need to be equipped with best practice knowledge of walkability and how to achieve it. If they don't know the facts, how are they expected to do or make the right decisions? Planners and policy officers like myself and like some of those in the room today really need to focus on things like health, public safety, the economy and climate change when discussing this topic with our elected officials. And from little things, big things grow. So, we can't make walkable cities overnight from nothing. Rather, we need long-term coordinated planning to ensure that we constantly are chipping away at this mammoth task, which brings me to urban planning. So through tools like local government infrastructure plans, precinct plans, or embedded outcomes in local planning schemes, we can continue to plan for walkability in the face of rapid population growth, the unaffordability of life, and climate change. So my final slide there, I guess I'll say that every single person in this room has a role to play in this walkability evolution. I guess there is your call to action. So walkable cities can create healthier, happier, more sustainable and more prosperous communities. However, achieving this vision requires bold and committed leadership, innovative and future fit thinking, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. So I hope you're all up for it. Thank you.
Okay, because you all presented such different things, I don't have one set question for all three of you. I kind of have different questions for each different person. Haleen, let's start with you. You talked a lot about what Port of Brisbane does. I just wanted to ask what you do on a day-to-day basis, and obviously you don't disclose anything.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's a really interesting question, actually, because for me, so that our online audience can see. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, what I was saying was, for me, every day is sort of different, and that's what makes it so interesting. For instance, usually what my day consists of is some days is a lot of just meetings with different customers and looking at, the type of developments that they're wanting to develop out there. And basically what myself and my team as a planner, what we do is we initially provide pre-lodgement advice in terms of what is required for a development to be approved on, as I mentioned, Brisbane Corporate land under our land use plan. And if, that requires, state approvals, then they have to go through SARA and things like that. Other things that, I do in my day-to-day is a lot of, so we have these planning documents, which once basically a development comes in, we provide pre-lodgement advice. Our customer comes and wants to, say, let's, develop a warehouse, for instance. Then they will obviously lodge a development application with Port of Brisbane. From there, essentially, we either request further information, so it's a lot of also report writing, and basically a lot of conversations in hallways and meetings about, how to make sustainable developments that are going to be long-term, that have, a number of different complexities within them. But yeah, so that's essentially a lot of what I do in my day-to-day. The other thing that I sort of get to, that I have the pleasure of attending, are a lot of ribbon cuttings for developments that have happened. For instance, a very recent one that's just basically been disclosed to the public is our Electrolux company, which is basically a white goods company. They've developed a warehouse out there, and it's really exciting for the Port of Brisbane because it's our first 6-star green rated facility. So that's really exciting for us. But yeah, so just a lot of, we do obviously have a lot of fun as well in terms of, going to lunches and meeting with customers and a lot of networking events and things like that. So, but yeah, it's a very exciting career. I never thought I would be working at a port, to be honest, but it's really rewarding and fulfilling. Oh, thank you. I hope that wasn't too long.
Thanks. My question for you, Ben. Sorry, actually, let me read what I wrote. Yeah. Okay, my question was, since obviously you work for council, specific to Brisbane, do you know if council or state government, or anyone have any like specific plans to make Brisbane more walkable? Like, I think I might have heard something about like wanting to make parklands more accessible. Like there was like a specific distance parks had to be from houses or something like that. Yeah, just did you know of anything?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I know like council, we have a fair few things going on. So we've got entire strategies devoted to, I guess, active transport. So there's the, oh geez, pulling out of the back of my mind now. I didn't work on it, but there's a strategy that's called, I think it's called Walkable Brisbane, and it's in draft form at the moment. But when it is, it was out for consultation a little while ago, but that's all about making the city more walkable. So that's one strategy. And then other strategies like the inner city strategy has introduced the idea of walkable hearts to a Brisbane context, where it sort of talks about, obviously it focuses on the inner city, so the inner 5K, but it introduces the idea of, or I guess the priority of having mid-block crossings and cross-block links and a lot of different things that pretty much help you get from point A to B through a precinct. So
Can you clarify for me what a mid-block crossing is?
yeah. So like for instance, assuming we all know like Adelaide Street, for example. So there's a crossing up from the Edward Street intersection before King George Square. There's like a little crossing.
Oh yeah.
That's so it's it's in the middle of the block. So often when you have city blocks, a lot of the time you have blocks that are quite large, but no dedicated crossing points in the middle. So you've got to wait until an intersection. So a key way to improve walkability is to give people more choices or options to cross.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So let me see what I wrote. Oh yeah, I was really interested, and I know it's kind of a side topic to your main research, but I was really interested in how you calculated the significance of all of those other socioeconomic factors. What was the process there, getting those?
So the most common model that we use is OLS, linear regression. But as you can see, I had like a small counties, like rural counties, with New York City, for example, with 10 million people or more. So I had to use a model that accounts for like outliers. So like I had rural counties that had like 60% growth. Like you can't compare that with someone like somewhere like San Francisco. So I use robust linear regression that accounts for outliers. I use that, and it's just the rest is just a simple regression. You have coefficient and you have a significance. So almost all of my variables, except for the ones that aren't significant, they are significant at 99%. So you can like with confidence, you can talk about their significance. So when I say that a state income tax is a very important factor in the US in population and job growth, it's a fact. Yeah. That's why people like leave California, because it's too expensive. Or when like median housing rent is a significant factor, it means that people don't want to stay in central cities that are too expensive and unaffordable. Or other factors like average January temperature. It's like the winter temperature. It's important for like people don't want to live in cold places. They prefer to go to live in warmer places. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that explanation. Just wondering what future plans you have for the research. Do you have anything else to explore, or any other topics you're interested in exploring? Or
after this is a paper actually I have written, and we are going to submit that to a journal. And I'm actually presenting this again. That's why I actually wasn't very prepared, because I just finished it yesterday. Last night I finished it. But yeah, I'm going to present that again in a conference. After this, I'm going to go deep into the donut effect.
Yeah.
I'm going to study metropolitan regions to see that if it actually how is it happening? Is it the same in Texas? And is it the same in Florida? So donut effect is important. Actually, the central cities are different in the US than in Australia. I think most of you probably have been to the US. Central cities are not that functioning compared to like Australian CBDs. So it's only normal for like metropolitan regions in the US to grow. But it has been like exacerbating over the past few years because of the unaffordability, and the pandemic actually helped people to understand that we might actually not need, like we don't need to like live in the cities anymore. We prefer to have like a house, like for our own, like our landlord's increasing rent like crazy. So I don't want to stay in the city anymore. So yeah, my next step is to go to the donut effect, like
Oh,
yeah, in more details.
yeah, sounds interesting. Ben, I actually just got another question for you. Because I know you're involved in planning for the 2032
Yeah.
Olympic Games here in Brisbane. Maybe this is a bit of I'm putting two things together in a question that might not be together, but do you think that planning for the Olympic Games and whatever developments Brisbane makes for the Olympic Games have any impact on, like, negative or positive, on making the city more or less walkable?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess to set the tone for my answer is that we're planning for the games as part of what's called the new norm. And so what that means is that we only construct, say, new venues if they're already needed, and we'll be only upgrading things where there's been an existing need that's been identified in, say, like a city plan or local government infrastructure plan and stuff like that. So like where there's already an identified need, that's when we do it. And I think the fact that there is already identified needs for more walkable infrastructure across Brisbane, then the games can be a really great opportunity for both us, the state government, and other partners to leverage that.
Yeah. Thank you. I might. Yes.
I have a question
Yes.
for everyone. Actually, I've got two. The first one's just a fun one. It is, do you have a favorite mode of transport, and is it different to what you would use most of the time? And my second question is sort of in the interspace, I guess, between walkable cities and working from home potentially leading to decentralization. Like, how do we merge those two things together? If we're spreading out, how do we say walkable? The two of you have any ideas on that? Or Haleen as well, I think you may be able to that.
In terms of your first question, which was about which mode of transport I like to take, I'm sorry to say, but I do prefer driving. Might be a bit of a controversy, but yes, like for instance, even today, I live on the north side, so I drove in, just got booked parking in advance. But in terms of other modes of transport that I do like to take, I quite enjoy a bus ride. I don't know about anyone else, but I find it really relaxing to just sit there and have to stop and take a breath and, just take some time for yourself, which is always nice. The second one, I'll leave to the boys, I think. I think they might have a bit more to say about that one.
I also prefer driving, but only because you have option in Australia. So I'm from Iran. So in Tehran, when I was studying and working in Tehran, you don't have that option. You have to take the bus or the subway, because it's finding parking. It's very difficult in the city. But here you have that option, and public transport is not that great actually. So you actually prefer to drive, right? But if maybe you have to force people, I don't know. That's one of your ideas, right? But in terms of the question that you asked, I think right now TODs become more important. Transit-oriented development is more important than ever. I think the time of monocentric cities are done, because they're not sustainable, they're not affordable. We might need polycentric cities, and so many center, not just one or two or three. That's why I think that TOD is very important. They are walkable and they're public transport oriented, and they have mixed use. They have different housing options. I think that's the future, and it's more important than ever, more even before more than pre-pandemic.
Completely agree with the second point, not so much the first point, but no, I'm kidding. I think as well, I'll preface and say that it's totally understandable that you both prefer driving. I think the fact that it's easy to prefer driving in Australia because we're such a car dominant society in that not only do we enjoy driving, but we have so much more infrastructure for driving than we do anything else. So look, I won't hold it against you. My favorite form of transport is actually the ferry, but I don't get to take it because I don't live near the river. So I catch the train every single day of my life. Yes, I do drive. I have a car as well, so I'm not like a total angel or anything. But I couldn't think of anything worse than driving into the city every day. Jeez, but power to you both. But to answer your second question, I was literally thinking the exact same thing as during your answer to the last question. But it's tough because I guess there are a couple of different points that are sort of wrapped up in what we've discussed in terms of walkability. That's one point, but then when you're working from home, a big piece of that presentation was around affordability, and affordability encompasses a lot of different factors, as we all know. And so I think walkability absolutely can be achieved outside the city centre. You don't have to have high rises to facilitate a walkable environment. You just have to have a lot of things around, and you have to have by which I mean you have to have things that are within walking distance, and then you have to have infrastructure and things to make that walking experience more enjoyable between those experiences. So I think that's part of the question, part of the answer. The other part is absolutely to your point around polycentric cities and having centres. That's a big part of it, and around having transit-oriented development. I think that's what we need to strive for. I think transit-oriented development came out and it was a massive buzz term, and everyone was like, "Oh, we've got to do it." Never really happened. We don't have any really great examples of transit-oriented development in Brisbane, at least. There were a few that tried and didn't really take off. And it's similar, we have a lot of centres that are designated in our strategic plan that haven't really gotten to where they were sort of envisioned to go. So I'm thinking Chermside is meant to be, a real secondary city, but you go there and it's entirely car-centric. It's like awful. And the only real thing to do there is go shopping in a shopping centre. That's all indoors. So I think if you focus on transit-oriented development, focus on having more things to actually do in terms of a mix of uses and a mix of housing typologies, that's where you get that mix between not necessarily being in the centre of a city, but also having a more affordable, walkable environment.
That answers your question.
It does. Yeah. I might check that online. That to see if we've got any questions. No one online? Oh, well, the answer is no online. Back to the. Oh, okay. Back to the floor, I guess.
Yes.
Haleen, for you.
Yeah, sure.
So you talked about, and maybe this is something that you cannot talk about.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Sustainability for the port. You mentioned that it's doing, or one of the best performing sustainability ports in Australia.
Yeah, that's
How is that happening? Like, what are you doing to make it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. In terms of sustainability, we at the Port of Brisbane, we actually have our own sustainability team in-house. And the approach that we take as a business is very holistic. We have basically 4 key themes that a number of our initiatives come under. So they're the 4 Ps: planet. Let's see if I can remember them: planet, prosperity, people, and one more. Where are we? People and partnerships. That's it. A very important one. So just as an example, like I said, we, in terms of, the planet pillar, we obviously have all of our development projects do achieve that 4-star green rating. Electrolux was just one very recent one that did achieve 5-star, which is really exciting for us at the port. And just as another example, in terms of planet, we try to achieve net zero environmental benefits. So that would be net zero scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, so direct and indirect. So yeah, in terms of sustainability, as more of a sort of, to more answer your question, we have basically, sustainability is a core principle that we focus on in all our initiatives that we complete at the Port of Brisbane, or that we focus on. But yeah, and I guess in terms of that holistic approach, they do come under those 4 key pillars. And the other thing that we also aim to achieve is that in terms of the United Nations sustainability goals, sustainable development goals, sorry, our business does achieve basically 14 out of the 17, in that it correlates to them and tries to actually achieve them. So I guess, yeah, in terms of sustainability of the Port of Brisbane, we're very passionate, and we've tried to encompass that in any project or any initiative or anything that we really do. But yeah, and another thing that I think kind of dovetails into that is that we have a safety first culture. That's essentially something that we bring at the forefront of anything that we complete at the Port of Brisbane, anything that we focus on. Safety is our #1 priority. So that's obviously physical safety as well as mental. But yeah, in terms of sustainability, I think that we do really try to focus on that and make it a really important thing that we keep at the forefront of any project that we deliver.
So like scope 1 and 2 emissions, do you guys use offsets, or do you try to actually reduce them in-house?
No, we reduce them in-house. Okay. Yeah. But I probably can't say too much more about that.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.
Any questions from anyone? Yes.
Sorry, this is again Haleen.
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering around when you are doing the construction and that new construction toward the end of Fisherman's Island, how are you managing the soil and contaminated land aspects?
Yeah.
And the pre and post monitoring around that with the environmental, I guess, and sustainability aspects, noting there are quite a number of Cancer sites.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So like I mentioned, we are right on the edge of Moreton Bay, which is, obviously a positive, and it is also a negative in that, we don't want to have any negative environmental benefits, negative environmental outcomes on grounds or wetlands. And essentially, in terms of answering your question, we have a number of, this is also within our land use plan, but essentially we have a number of protocols that we have to abide by in terms of, any sort of soil contamination, anything like that. We have really strict policies that we follow within our land use plan. But in terms of managing all that, we have our own environmental management team in-house that their sole purpose is to basically ensure that any sort of construction projects that we do, we ensure that there's no negative environmental outcomes that, could be really negative in terms of, moving soil, or even things like, stormwater drainage. There can't be, certain contaminated water going into streams that it shouldn't be going into. So yeah, we have, I probably can't go into too much detail, but all I can say is that we do have a lot of really strict protocols that we follow in, and we have a really systematic approach in terms of the things that we do and that are set in place to ensure that we don't have any, environmental, any negative environmental outcomes that do go into surrounding land, or even the other thing that I should mention actually is that one positive point in terms of our location is that, like I said, we are far from any sort of residential areas. The closest suburb on Fisherman Islands is Manly, which is still 2.5 kilometres away. So that is a really great advantage that we have. for example, some other ports, Port of Melbourne is right near the CBD, so that is a really negative point for them because they do have to counter for that. You know, having residential land uses right near them makes it really hard. Certain projects that you're trying to deliver for certain, you know, customers. But yeah, like I said, we do have a lot of protocols that we have to make sure that we ensure and follow.
These soil on site, I'm sure, all sense all of the transport of it, especially with trucks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, it's all right. No worries. Good question.
Oh, thanks.
I'll ask a more personal one because I could, ask a question to each book. But what drew each of you, I guess, into planning, and then how is that? Like, how have your interests / careers changed from there? Like, was it something you decided to go to uni, or you just looking for a job, or and then you went to uni and then your interest changed, went and studied a particular thing, or like, just kind of open-ended. So
Who wants to start?
Oh, geez.
I can start.
Georgie, oh, please.
Yeah. All right. So basically, when I started, I didn't really know what town planning was about. I didn't know anyone that had studied it. I think I started because I was curious. Actually, it was out of curiosity. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't really know what I was putting myself into. I just wanted to know more, essentially. And yeah, so then, obviously I obviously knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know too much about what town planning sort of entailed, what it could lead to in terms of a career. And I basically started, and then I fell in love with town planning, actually. I really loved it. I thought that my 4 years at uni went really, really quickly, and I guess that's just because I enjoyed it so much, and that's what I put it down to. But yeah, so I think I started out just really loving the idea, and then I ended up finishing a degree. And then from there, I also did a little bit of teaching as well in uni, which I thought was really different and really refreshing. And then from there, I guess I actually did some work in Coffs Harbour before I worked here in Brisbane. Even though, Brisbane is my hometown, I missed it too much, had to come back. But yeah, so I came back, and then honestly, I never ended up, if someone asked me about, 2-3 years ago, or do you think you would ever end up, thinking about working at a port, I would say no. I had never thought about it before until I came back to Brisbane and I was scoping out different jobs and sort of where I wanted my career to head. But I'm so glad that I did end up taking, that challenge on. Yeah, it's just a really fantastic group of people. Well, a really big group of people that we have. But yeah, it's something that I really do enjoy, and I'm excited to see what comes next. Thank you.
I got into planning through architecture. So I had a pretty lifelong obsession at the ripe age of about 17 for architecture. And then I did an assignment in geography in high school, and then found out all about town planning. And went to a few uni open days, and then found out a little bit more from there, and decided that I think, like back then, my thought process still makes sense in my mind. But when I thought of architecture, I really enjoyed its design aspect, but also how it sort of leans on the history of architecture. You're not doing something from scratch, you're working from a broader context. But that it combined that with planning's, I guess, more broad focus. So where architecture predominantly focuses on site-based works, planning, you can affect an entire community, and broader than that. So I think that's where it sort of stuck out to me, but also that it has a really strong connection to the built environment, and that's where my interests sort of were. And then, going through uni, there were a few times there where I didn't quite make it all the way through, just because frustration, COVID, all of that sort of stuff, thinking, is this actually what I want to do? Coming to terms with the fact that yes, it is, I just need to stick it out. And then working in council, I've been lucky enough to work across a lot of different sort of types of planning, which has been a great learning experience. Like I started off in development assessment, which is very, very different to what I do now. And yeah, so now I'm working in the games planning team, which is a sort of niche end of planning, but it's still there, still on the spectrum. So it's, yeah, not quite where I thought I'd be, but very exciting nonetheless.
Oh, I always wanted to be an architect. But the problem is, like, so in Iran, we take a national exam to go to universities, and everyone, like in my year, when I did it in 2009, there were like 400,000 people for engineering and things like that. So I couldn't get into architecture school for my university in my hometown. I wanted to stay in my hometown. So urban planning was the next best thing. And I actually like it very much, more than architecture, because it can be about people, it can be about like the environment, the city, it can be about the history of cities. It's like, I think it's even better than architecture actually. So I'm happy. Yeah, but doing a PhD, well, after my master's degree, I was working in different companies, different firms. But my last job, I was a executive director of an office in my hometown again, in a historic zone of Shiraz. Shiraz is a very old city in Iran. It's actually named, like, the wine that you have is named after my hometown, Shiraz wine. So I was working with refugees. It was about collaborative planning with refugees and like people that are not like disadvantaged people in terms of like their income. And like I realized that it's not for me. I want to do research. Therefore, actually also the situation in Iran, especially in terms of like the economic situation, is not very good. So I wanted to immigrate from the country as well. So in Australia, I also had other options, like in McGill University in Canada. I could go there as well. I chose Australia. I think it's one of the best countries on the planet, actually. But then it dragged a lot. So I was supposed to come here before the pandemic. Then the pandemic happened, and I had to, like, I couldn't do anything for 2 years. It was, yeah, now I actually don't like research anymore. Yeah, I want to go back to the industry. Yeah. So yeah, that's it.
Sorry, Ben, I have a question for you, actually. if
Oh,
you don't
okay,
mind.
yeah, intra-panel
so-
question.
So you mentioned that, you didn't think that you would end up working in BCC within the, focusing on the Olympics that are upcoming. Where did you sort of initially think that you would end up land in terms of, working within BCC or not, or?
Yeah, good question. I think, well, I started at BCC in my fourth year of uni. So I guess before that, I'd gone from not thinking at all where I was going to be and having no idea, and still honestly trying to figure out what the hell planning even was, because like in our first year we had to do a poster that is, what is planning? And I'm like,
I remember.
geez, still couldn't do that. It's too broad. But no, so I think where I thought I was going to be, that's a really hard question. I think
you don't have to.
No, you're putting me on the spot and I'm answering. I'm just working it out. But I think BCC was definitely, I guess, on my radar for a while before I applied, just because they're huge and they do so many different types of planning, like I've said, and they have one of the largest stakes in planning in Brisbane, if not the largest stake. So it was pretty easy to assume that maybe I'd end up there one day, maybe. But I think the type of planning I always I think was geared towards that more strategic lens, just because that's what we learnt at uni. Like we learnt a lot more around strategic thinking and strategic planning and sort of how things work next to each other and how they interact and all of that fun stuff. Master planning, exactly, all of that fun stuff. And so I assumed I would have sort of maybe ended up in somewhere like that. And I think I did that for about 6 months when I worked in urban renewal a couple of years ago, but and I absolutely loved it. I think I probably will go back to that one day, but I think, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
It's a bit murky, but I think planning, you can sort of do anything with it. So
You can.
like you said, you didn't expect to work at a port, but
No.
you absolutely love it.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
yeah.
Question for Ben. So thanks for the presentation.
No worries.
I love that you used the example of Lara and Inala as a sort of a question mark about walkability, other than Forest Lake, which is right near them. Forest Lake is actually a really great suburb for walking around.
Yes, well, master plan. So
Yes. And I can see what's going on in Lara and what has happened in Nala. And what's also coming up in Ellen Grove, which is, I guess, the next kind of Lara. And it all seems very hodgepodge.
Mm.
Developers buy off individual parcels of land, they build their own development on it. Nothing's connected to anything else. There's no thought about like an overarching plan the way that Forest Lake. How do we address and fix this before they already get developed and then we're stuck with a car-centric outer suburban area where everyone's just going to drive everywhere?
oh, geez, I feel ridiculously inexperienced to answer that. That's like the key question of planning, I think. But you really hit the nail on the head. I think there are multiple answers to that. I think one is you've got to have a really, I guess, rigid planning framework, and I think that sets the overall, I guess, tone of how things are going to, I guess, shape out. Whether it's a local planning scheme, whether it's, I guess, more at the state level, a state planning framework, or things like that. So, or like a PDA as well. So, like all of those sorts of planning instruments, they set out planning outcomes in those areas. And I think that council, they have the city plan 2014, as Haleen mentioned. So that will, I guess, provide, I guess, an overarching vision of what should happen. And then that obviously has a lot of caveats like funding, like investment, infrastructure, when things actually happen, like you mentioned, that it's sort of happening in a really piecemeal way as people, I guess, sell their land to developers. It's not like it used to be where you'd buy a huge, 50-acre farm over near Caloundra and then develop the whole thing and then sell it off. So, or in Forest Lake's case. So I think those days, especially in an urban context, are very much behind us, just because we can't do it anymore. But I think for places like Pollara, Allen Grove, the fringe, I think it takes potentially a more coordinated approach. I think it's not just a council thing, it's not just a state thing, it's not just a piecemeal developer thing. I think there's an element there where we sort of need to come together and, I guess, get an understanding for what is actually feasible, what we can actually do, because there's only so much we can do, say, as a council, and go out and say, this is what we want to zone the area, this is what this is where we want the roads to go, and all that will happen through development. But I think it's more that long-term strategic thinking that isn't insular. You don't want insular planning ever. You want to be, I guess, collaborating with those in the know, those in the industry, those different levels of government. So I guess the collaboration angle is really key, but then also the investment angle. We see a lot of the time you'll have new suburbs go in that have no connection to anything without a road. So like it's, goes back to the other point I made earlier, is we're car dominated. And it's hard to say, let's not be a car dominated environment or society when all we do is create development with just roads. So it's tough from that angle, but I say that and I say it would be great to have a train station built before the thousands of people come to make it warranted, but it also costs an astronomical amount of money, and it's hard for governments, I guess, to warrant spending that when they could instead spend it on things like hospitals or parks in the inner city. So I don't know. I think there's a balancing act there that's sometimes or often missing, but it's also hard to say. It's hard for me to sit here and say, well, this is what we should be doing. It's not like we're doing something, really, really poorly across the board. It's like we're focusing on different areas at different times. And I think that's where planning sometimes falls through the cracks.
Yeah, and then actually, just going back to TODs, which was talked about briefly before, Bridgeland Station is the closest train station to that sort of area. And over the last 5 to 10 years, as I travel through that area, I can see the developments coming up, and it's all car oriented. And like, there's so much land that was vacant, or it was farmland basically, that is now being converted to other uses. That sat around the train station, which would be right for a TOD, like perfect for it. And every year there's a new development that goes through that's not it's all car oriented.
Yeah.
There's like 3 or 4 petrol stations going in there. There's a home
Yeah.
center.
That's it.
Like drive-throughs everywhere. Like everything is car oriented.
Yeah.
And it's pretty depressing. Like,
Yeah, no, it is. It is. We actually went out there to Richlands and like Ipswich and everything on a first year uni field trip, which was very enlightening. And going to Richlands and seeing, I guess, just they had like plenty of missing middle. They had all the townhouses that you could ever ask for, but they only had roads. So you were living in, you know, all right density, but you didn't really have anything to really help
There's
you.
no reason. to
Exactly.
walk anywhere.
Yes, correct. So all it was townhouses and huge paddocks of really high quality ag land that would one day become townhouses. So I completely agree. I think that the trouble with TODs as well is the way that we define a TOD is that you can't just have like plenty of us in this room could think of, you know, examples of transit oriented development. Toowong is probably front of mind. Albion may be front of mind, but the thing with transit oriented development is you need to have a particular frequency of public transport services going through it. And at the moment, we don't really have that frequency sort of anywhere because it's not just peak services, but it's all throughout the day. What's the average frequency of these services? How many services are available? How many lines run through there? And so it's hard to sort of, I guess, gear towards TODs when we don't have, I guess, a rail network that is up to scratch to that capacity, but we also don't have a population. It's a lot of different factors there, but as well to the density point around the train station, I think, it would be one thing for us to zone that around a train station, say if we want medium density, we want high density, whatever. But it's another thing for that to actually be feasible. So council, state government can zone whatever they want to zone, but if it's not a feasible development, people aren't going to come along and develop what is intended. So if, a 10-story apartment block isn't feasible, but it's what we want, they're not going to build it. Like it's got to be a profitable exercise for developers because they need to keep developing, which is what we want them to do. So I think it's tough when you're that far out. You need a bit more going on to, I guess, warrant the density. And they've got the missing middle, but they don't really have anything else, which is where the problem comes in.
I might have to wrap it up. We are running out of time. If anyone has any further questions for our 3, please come and speak to them. We'll have some refreshments and food up the back. So please all network. But thank you, all 3 of you, for coming and speaking today, tonight. Really appreciate your little nuggets of knowledge. I've learned so much. I'm not a planner, I'm a GIS person. So I've learned a lot.
You helped me out with GIS a while back.
I did, that's how we met.
Yeah,
When I went to council. But yeah, everyone, round of applause.